Well, here we are yet again, another edition of the highlights of WWE. This one spanning from March 7th, 2022 to March 11th, 2022. First and foremost, before I get going here, I just want to offer my sincerest thoughts, concerns for Big E, who suffered a, well, I know people think many things when you say broken neck, but there was something broken in his neck. Thankfully, he had an update today saying that it was minor compared to what it could have been, basically. Like, it definitely still a major injury, but it's minor compared to what it could have been. He didn't say, that's my words, more not his, but so he could, I mean, we don't know how long he could be out, but he'll definitely be out of commission for a little while. So moving on from there, let's very briefly have some honorable mentions here. I'll start off here. This is in no particular order in this respect. Start off with SmackDown. We had Rick Boogs and Shinsuke Nakamura offering an official challenge to the Usos for a WrestleMania Tag Team title match. Should be good. I suspect that they're probably going to put the titles on Nakamura and Boogs, unless they're going to put the Usos over as holding the titles for like a year at least. So, should be good. Pat McAfee and Austin Theory. They're having a pretty good build for this match at WrestleMania, and Pat McAfee is just awesome in the ring. So I loved it when he was fighting in NXT against Adam Cole. That was just some classic stuff. This should be a great match. Pat McAfee had enough of Austin Theory's bullying. He attacked him and was quote-unquote escorted from ringside, so Michael Cole had to call the rest of the main event by himself. So that was okay. We go on to honorable mention from NXT. The tag title scene is, I think, getting heated up. You had this mystery of who done it mystery for an attack in the parking lot. You had the Creed brothers that were attacked. I suspect it was MSK because they're the ones who stepped up immediately and were given a title opportunity. Would be an interesting little swerve. And, of course, Wade Barrett kind of hinted at it too. So, I don't know. Pretty good stuff there. All right, onward to the top 5. Before the tragic little incident with Big E, we see that Pete Dunne has been called up from NXT. Which they like to sneak this stuff in, and he's been put into a stable with Ridge Holland and Sheamus, kind of a little old-fashioned bully, gang, if you will. But they call Pete Dunne by a quote-unquote nickname, Butch, and a lot of people have backlashed against it. Pete Dunne's just a great wrestler, and you know what? I'm just gonna wait and see what happens before I start to bitch about the name change. So, do I like him being called Pete Dunne? Of course, that's what I know him by. But Butch, who knows? He may make it work. All right, number 4, Dolph Ziggler defeating Braun Breaker and Tommaso Ciampa on NXT to become the new NXT champion. I did not see this coming. I mean, a part of me sort of suspected it, but the rumor is that Braun Breaker is very likely to be just shot up straight to the main roster very soon, because I believe McMahon liked what he saw when Braun was on Raw, and Ziggler is of course going to take the mantle here. So you're probably going to have a Ciampa-Ziggler feud for a minute before Ciampa likely gets called up as well officially, because Ciampa's been wrestling some matches on Raw. But either way, this was a great way to open up the show, but completely took me by surprise. I was shocked. So great match. Great little shocker there. Number 3, Ricochet versus Sami Zayn, the rematch. This was a great bout. Of course, right before it, you had the whole Austin Theory, Pat McAfee stuff. But this, I mean, a lot of people have been crapping all over this episode of SmackDown. It wasn't terrible. It just wasn't the best. But this match right here stole the show for sure. Ricochet retaining in a great match. We go on to number 2 here. Edge is full-on evil. He had this great moment here. Raw was just excellent this week. And I'll talk more about that in a more detailed review that I'll do on Excess. But Edge here, he had like the blue lighting. He cut his music off. Just came out just with this death stare. And he was saying like, AJ Styles, basically saying you should be thankful for me because I should be waking something up in you. But he said you woke something up in me. And I love this. Like, he's just, I don't know, I just love evil Edge here. I'm not going to call it so much the Rated R Superstar Edge. This is the evil Edge. And I'm really, like, Edge is just so good on the mic. And he's just so good in this because he comes from that old era. And, a lot of these other athletes in WWE, the superstars, they need to take note of what they're seeing with Edge. Some top-notch grade A stuff here. Just a great promo. And finally, number 1, Kevin Owens, with what's been predicted for a moment, issued a challenge for Stone Cold Steve Austin, and he did it in such a way that kind of gets you excited for it. I'm looking forward to it. He's been picking on Texas for a few weeks, and Stone Cold accepted the challenge to be on a special KO show, but it's going to be more of a beatdown, a little more of a scuffle, like kind of an unofficial match. I don't know. I'm loving it, and I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be great. So yeah, those are the top 5, the highlights of WWE from March 7th to March 11th. Once again, so sorry to hear about Big E. Hope he gets better very soon. I'll catch you guys on the episode of Excess coming up as soon as possible.
Alright, this is Daniel here, and I wanted to discuss the question of diplomacy or war. Diplomacy or war. What do we do? I'm a pacifist, quite honestly. I have never, well, I can't say never, I've long thought that war was just almost always available. And I have to say almost always because there are times when you have to consider war not in an aggressive manner, but in a defensive manner. Not going on the offense, but on defense. So the only time I personally think it's necessary is when you have to defend yourself. Just like fighting, you don't have to go out of your way to go fight someone, individually. You only need to be prepared to fight if someone's trying to come after you. And that's the way it should be. And honestly, war should be the same thing, should be looked at in the same way as fighting on an individual level, on a much smaller scale. Only fight, only go to war when you have to. And for a long time, pretty much throughout our history, war has been seen as a necessity not just on defense. War has been justified more times than I care to count when you're going on offense. And I remember when the Iraq War took place in 2003, a lot of the commentators at the time were saying it was the first ever aggressive war in the history of the United States. It was the first time we'd ever gone on offense, that we had waged a war of aggression. And honestly, it's not true. Now, yes, it's true that it's the first time we didn't, try to create this notion that we were attacked first by Iraq, because we weren't. There was no evidence of that at all. But honestly, it was not the first time we had waged a war of aggression. Just the first time we had waged a war of aggression that was so obviously aggressive. But, you can go through the history of this country. But I'm not going to spend all this time right now beating up on the United States, for our militaries and our government's decisions to use our military to be aggressive. This is an issue of diplomacy versus war. And as a pacifist, yes, I want to side with diplomacy. Now, of course, when those people who see war as a necessity, once again, as a pacifist, pure pacifists don't even see war as a necessity in defense. But I don't think that makes sense. I'm sorry. But as a pacifist, I don't think it makes sense to disarm yourself, to defend yourself from defending yourself. I think it is important to avoid and prevent and even ban aggressive war. which it's obviously, it's supposed to be illegal internationally, but of course the United States kind of demonstrated that aggressive war is okay if you're the United States, but not everyone else. But, you know, a lot of pacifists out there are more pure in that they don't think war is ever justified. I just personally think that makes sense. Actually, I think that's probably a minority of pacifists, but still. Defensive war, I think, is essential. Only, obviously, if you are truly playing defense. Not playing quote-unquote defense like the United States supposedly was with the Spanish-American War, or the Mexican-American War, or, you know, the Vietnam War, the Korean War, and so forth and so on. There's a lot. So, I'm talking about pure defensive war. Like, someone's literally about to attack you, and, like, you can tell they're going to attack you. That's the only time I believe war is necessary. So, there are people who believe war is necessary outside of that, obviously. They believe in, you know, being more aggressive. They think those are the people that tend to agree with, like, the so-called Bush doctrine of preemptive war, which is, you know, the doctrine that went behind the war on Iraq. You know, there's, you know, he kind of, Bush and company kind of used, like, say, the whole, you know, Hitler scenario that his father used, you know, that Saddam Hussein was a threat to become the next Hitler, although he was never that kind of threat. Yes, maybe to the people of Kuwait he was dangerous and the people of his own country, but he was never someone who was going to be on the level of Hitler, like George Bush the First, you know, asserted. So, you know, when it comes to the Bush doctrine and preemptive war, it just became a whole, not so much a made-up thing because it's been done before. I mean, after all, the Nazis basically used their own version of preemptive war. Basically, let's put it on this way. Bush and them weren't actually trying to stop Iraq from becoming a threat. Bush and company wanted a major war so that way they can, you know, put it under their belt, you know, so they can say, oh, look at my accomplishments, you know, put it on their trophy case. That's what they wanted. Bush wanted a major foreign policy accomplishment to help him politically, and he thought that he hit a home run with the Iraq War. I remember when Bush first came into office, there was a lot of talk about him going to war with Iraq, you know, Bush versus Saddam Part 2. You know, I remember all that. This is back in early 2001, months before 9/11. But that's another issue for another day. So, you know, preemptive war is objectionable. It is horrendous. You know, you have preemptive war, and then you have the more overt, just straight up aggressive war. You have imperial war, imperial conquest. That's more what the Iraq War was, let's be honest. Imperial conquest. And in fact, most wars by the West typically are imperial conquest. And I say by the West because, let's be honest, how many countries on the Eastern Hemisphere, with the exception of Russia, how many of those countries are actually embarking on imperial conquest? Russia is, you know, a lot of people, there's some experts that say that technically there is no Europe, there is no Asia, they're basically just one continent. Which, of course, you know, geographically, they're not entirely wrong. But, you know, when it comes to Russia, they kind of want to be like Europe and have their own empire. They've had an empire before. They know what it's like. They want it again. So, it's one thing you got to keep your eye out for with them is, Russia is always a threat of imperial conquest, just like the rest of the West. Just like the West, I should say. So, you know, when the Western world wages war, it's typically for imperial conquest. Whether it's outright trying to conquer them and make that country a territory of the attacking country, or it's for economic conquest, you know, which is typically what imperial conquest is these days. They are waging war for the benefit of corporate, you know, of the corporate community. Because I was just going to say corporate America, but it's not just corporate America. It's corporations in, you know, Great Britain. Canada really hasn't waged any wars of conquest. But, there's, France, obviously. France hasn't really done it, a whole lot since the mid-1900s, but it's been more the United States than everyone else. Thing is, it's capitalist imperial conquest, and it's kind of like a new version of mercantilism. A lot of economic scholars like to equate socialism with mercantilism, but what it truly is like is basically capitalism, just it's capitalism, but with a little bit more influence by the state. So it's kind of like a socialist, capitalist melding, and, with the corporate entities being more in control than anything. So that's kind of what mercantilism is. So anyways, that's another issue for another day. I'm not going to talk full on to economics because I'm kind of oversimplifying it. So anyways, my point of all this is that war really should be an absolute last resort. And all this talk about what's going on with Ukraine and Russia, you hear a lot of people saying, sort of indicating that we should be preemptive. I see some people saying that we need to back down, completely stay out of this, which unfortunately is not an option for a whole host of reasons. You have some people who think we should become very aggressive and even just full-fledged get involved in Ukraine and help wage war against Russia in Ukraine. That would be epically disastrous. You're talking about igniting a third world war. That's what that would do. I mean, a third world war may very well have already started. As frightening as that is to think of. It may have already started. But going into Ukraine to join the fight against Russia would guarantee that this ignites into a third world war. You also, have those who believe that, Biden is doing just fine and that sanctions is the way to go. That maybe we should lend more military aid. So that's what's likely happening right now, is lending military aid and just continuing sanctions. So there's three groups of people. Let's put it this way. I'm someone who's very critical of U.S. approaches to foreign policy. I'm someone who's very critical of the Biden administration, most certainly of Republican administrations. But let's put it this way. I want to have a diplomatic solution here, but it is completely irresponsible to ignore what Russia is doing. This isn't like, say, Iraq attacking Kuwait. This isn't like, say, what if Venezuela attacked Ecuador? This isn't like that. This isn't on a minor scale. Russia is one of the two major superpowers on the globe. I mean, they're not technically a superpower anymore, but let's put it this way. They have the firepower to alter the course of human history. They do. And them making a move, an aggressive move, eastward towards the rest of Europe, them making this aggressive move could be a sign of things to come. This could tell us that something horrible is coming. Because already something horrible is unfolding in Ukraine. The poor people of Ukraine. I mean, yes, there are some other political issues that are more specific, more detailed about what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. But let's be honest here. Ukraine used to be a part of Russia. The Russian Empire is something that a lot of Russians talk very fondly of, especially Putin. And he wants an empire. He wants to rebuild the Russian Empire. He wants to absorb Ukraine back into Russia. He doesn't care about all these issues of defending the Russian-speaking people of Ukraine against terrible policies. No, this is about empire. And from what I've just read, apparently he's also making threats towards Sweden and Finland. I mean, we can't ignore that. I'm pretty sure both of those countries are NATO countries. If he makes a move on NATO, that's World War III. End of story. Because NATO has law-binding treaties, and they are absolutely binding, legally binding treaties that obligate the member states, all member states, including the United States, to engage in war with whatever country is attacking another NATO country. Of course, this is a policy that's kind of outdated, don't get me wrong, but I've long been someone who was arguing for NATO to be disassembled. I've long believed that it was a Cold War relic that just needed to go away. But Russia right now is making it hard to justify that position. They are. So, Putin could very well be reviving the Cold War. And in fact, we could be right in the middle of that. Right in the middle of the beginning stages of a new Cold War that could last generations more. It might only be as long as Putin is in power, but fact of the matter is that this attack on Ukraine really can't stand. It is a major offensive by a country that's not exactly a minor country. I'm not saying that countries like, Yemen, Sudan, Venezuela, or like, there's no country that's really, truly minor, but I'm saying economically significant, which is also bad to say. Politically significant is also bad to say. I'm just saying, this is not a minor issue. Especially since he's making moves towards the rest of Europe. That becomes a huge threat. The moment he attacks a NATO country, it's over. So, this became like a long rant, remark on what's going on in the world, but we can't ignore it. And unfortunately, the pacifist part of me realizes that Putin may be making a non-pacifist position inevitable. So I think we need to continue to try and aim for diplomacy, but also take actions that punish Russia in a non-military way for what they're doing. But if he escalates it to that point, then we'll have no choice. And I really hope it doesn't get there. Okay, thank you.
But Mushroom Kingdom rap, that was originally called Nintendick Slap. Yeah, funny name. Bragg is a funny fucker. But it's a song. It's a Mario.
Right.
I see a Mario themed rap.
Right.
And
I saw this as
Bowser.
like him just being goofy.
Well, yeah, it's him being goofy.
Right.
But it's a serious goofy because he does all these like fucking funny shit in the song. And I think he did a wonderful job, and I wish that they wouldn't have, because they wrote a lot of the song because he had Mario sound effects in the background. Like you heard like, "It's a me, Mario." And
okay. So like, I mean, I didn't hear that in this version of the song.
If you go and look up the song on
his original release
of it, you hear because it would be called Nintendick Slap. Or I think he might have actually changed it to Kingdom Kingdom Rap as well. But the original one had a bunch of
like Mario sound effects
and everything. And he feels like it took a lot away from the song when they made him cut that shit. But I was like, I like the rap as it is. It's just it is missing something, but it's just he built the song around that. But I still find it funny. I still love the references. It's still a good song.
Right.
They
you just have to be careful with copyright and stuff.
And they let you know immediately, so you don't get flagged for that.
Right.
Call me Mario, man, I got that stash. Love that beach, give me that ass. I'm flipping bricks and I'm making coin. My big mushroom got a super smash. Go Shibu within super jump. I pack that bouncer in my trunk. Watch a bullet bill, like empty shells. Don't touch my bitch, it's not ending well. Chain of chops, you better take a walk. Unloaded barrels, go with Donkey Kong. That's superstar, leave you where you are. My fireballs leave you blinded shot. Come at me, well, that's a blooper. I'll show you where they call me super curb. Stop your homie, then take his back. Kick that shit right up your boomer card over Luigi be hitting fights. Pack that shit like toast, turn bike, could be chipping nothing in the win that cup. Could be quick, bitches suck my nuts. Run, see me jump, have fun, I'm on another level. Fuck the sun, man, here we come. I'm powered up and I'm made of metal. I'm Digiosi, see you later, homie. Stir a macaron, you can have an apple. I'm making moves, no one never lose. Eat a bag of shrews and I dust your castle. See me run, see me jump. Have fun, I'm on another level. Fuck the sun, man, here we come. I'm powered up and I'm made of metal. I'm ditching OCC later, homie, stir macaroni. You can have an apple, I'm making moves, no one never lose. Eat a bag of roots, not dust your castle. I'm motherfucking out of seeing. Honestly, it look good in red. Draw, kick a goom around, house, turtle the put Bowser Jr. to fucking bed. And my awareness stands for murder, be beating bitches with different hats. Take a gator at my raccoon tail, don't look now, it just like your rap. Now this one we're gonna take it to the cleaners, being weak creatures my size, they steer platforming your homies 4 kilometers, turn Bowser's fam too buzzy beaters. But away spitting, I made her swallow them up in these cracks like paper Mario. I'll be a superstar, just listen to the audience, be run on your first rule is cut it. Give me things something you better know. Fire spits me and Mario, doesn't matter the castle or where you can whip tossing your ass, so won't get Bowser. See me run, see me jump, have fun, I'm on another level. Fuck the sun, man, here we come, I'm powered up and I'm made of metal. I'm ditching OCC later, homie, stir macaroni. You can have an apple, I'm making moves, no one never lose. Eat a bag of shrews and I dust your castle. See me run, see me jump, have fun, I'm on another level. Fuck the sun, man, here we come, I'm powered up and I'm made of metal. I'm ditching OCC later, homie, stir macaroni. You can have an apple, I'm making moves, no one never lose. Eat a bag of shrews and I dust your castle.